Thank you so much, Kevin, and I'm so proud and happy to be here at NatalCon. This is my first one ever, and judging by the news reports, this should be a very interesting conference. I don't think I've ever been to a conference that generated more hit pieces before it's even happened, so there's that. I am the eldest of 10 kids, and I'm also the father of 7, thank you. I will tell you something very embarrassing. I actually just figured out what causes it, and everything makes a lot more sense. Originally, I thought it was drinking too much wine with your wife, but it turns out there's a little bit more involved in that. But I'm here because I think that the real problem with our failing demographic crisis is the lack of fathers, lack of strong men, and manliness in this country. But I also think that we are undervaluing being a dad. So it makes me sad to hear that more and more young men are saying that they don't want to have kids, that they don't care if they have kids, and they're pretty sure that they won't have kids. I think that this is both a disaster for them individually, but also for society as a whole. As a dad, I can tell you that part of the problem is that I don't think society has a very good idea of what dads are actually good for. Judging from basically every sitcom in the past few decades, dads seem to be as generally well-meaning idiots. Homer Simpson, Phil Dunphy from Modern Family, or my personal favorite, Stan Marsh from South Park. People like having us around, more or less. We can help out from time to time, but you've got to keep an eye on us. Moms are parent 1 and dads are parent 2. We're nice to have around, but we're not strictly necessary. The ways men generally would like to care for their families by providing for them and protecting them, these today are seen as toxic, and the idea that men have any unique role to play in family life is viewed with suspicion. On top of that, men are told that whether or not they have kids is none of their business. Having children is seen solely as a personal decision on the part of the woman, even within marriage. This is not a very attractive vision for young men. Men need to be needed, and telling them that they really aren't is going to lead them to look elsewhere. And there are plenty of other places for us to look. Whether or not young men want to get married, there are millions of other things competing for our time and our attention and energy. A lot of these things are not just distractions, they are outright counterproductive. For example, I can't walk down the street of the place that I grew up in anymore without seeing signs advertising weed or seeing slot machines in every single bar and restaurant. You can't even watch sports on TV anymore without being completely inundated with ads for sports betting. And I know that this is going to sound stodgy, but I also think that technology has been absolutely disastrous for young men and family formation. There's social media, which makes just about everyone who uses it miserable and borderline mentally ill, except for you, Jack. Yet we've let this become one of the primary ways that young people interact with each other. Meanwhile, we've given a whole generation of young men infinite pornography machines that they can carry around with them wherever they go. I'm actually surprised that this doesn't come up more in conversations about our falling birth rates. Is it any surprise that people are having a harder time getting married and having kids, given that some alarming percent of young men are deeply addicted to pornography? It's also important to note that these distractions, weed, gambling, social media, porn, these are not new to America, but the growth in these industries is new, and it's anything but organic. What's also new in our day are the methods and amounts of marketing and advertising used to promote these things. Firstly, the smartphone has essentially allowed major corporations to reach their potential customers on a 24/7 basis at incredible levels. On top of that, the amount of data that these corporations are allowed to collect, buy, and sell on individuals gives them an incredible amount of power to reach particularly vulnerable and lonely people. These corporations, by the way, would refer to these vulnerable and lonely people as their target audience. Prior to the advent of the smartphone, corporations had to reach you through much less pervasive means. Broadcast mediums such as radio or television, direct mail, email, phone calls, and billboards. Today, we still have all of those mediums, but we also have digital targeting, text messaging, and God knows what else is going to come from artificial intelligence. Secondly, the amount of money that we spend on advertising in this country, and this distraction industrial complex, as I call it, is more than we've ever seen before. For example, just one sports book, and there are dozens of them, because I use several of them, FanDuel spends over $1 billion per year in marketing. To put that number in perspective, McDonald's spends just over $4 billion per year globally for their marketing. And while it's unclear how much the porn industry spends on marketing annually, Forbes recently estimated that the global porn industry is worth at least $58 billion and is expected to grow to over $74 billion by 2030. It is worth, in my opinion, it's worth exploring policies that restrict the ability of these companies to target individuals or at least set limits on how much they are allowed to spend on marketing these obviously harmful products. Because right now, it is the wild, wild west. I think it's worth stepping back if we're serious about solving this crisis and thinking about why men become fathers in the first place and how that actually happens. Sometimes, no offense to Scott Yenner, because he's actually the opposite of this, but sometimes when the academics take over too much, stuff becomes hopelessly abstracted. People don't have kids just because they're trying to maximize their own utility, or because they want to help the fatherland, or the gene pool, or because they want to help the cause of humanity writ large. Maybe some weird people do some things at some times for these reasons. But by and large, people have kids because they love their spouse and they give their kids life for the same reason that they give their kids anything else, because they love them too. By the way, I do want to say I love seeing all these kids here. I saw a little baby crawling around on the floor. It reminds me of home. Thank you. And I saw these kids with these beautiful heads of red hair. I only have one red head. I married a stunning redhead, so I have to give my beautiful wife Katie a shout out there. But if all that sounds sappy about love and family and marriage, or doesn't sound data-driven enough, I'm sorry, but it is just the truth. And by love, I don't mean that you have warm feelings towards someone. I mean that you actually want something good for another person, and that you're willing to sacrifice for them. Victor Hugo, the author of Les Miserables, once wrote that you can give without loving, but you cannot love without giving, and that the world runs on these small acts of sacrifice and kindness and offering for the ones that we love. The Western world, in fact, was built by men who had families to feed and provide for. You want to bring kids in the world because kids are good and life is good. You want to get married because you love your spouse, not just because you love yourself. These distractions, weed, technology, gambling, pornography, careerism, you name it, these get in the way of family formation because they're solely about ourselves, individuals. They make men less able to commit to marriage. They even make us less attractive to women. And they make men less able to undertake the sacrifices necessary to raise a family. Marriage must be part of this solution. Other people can tell you a lot better than I can exactly how much of the decline in birth rates is due solely to the decline in marriage. It's a lot. They can also prove with many more charts exactly how bad cohabitation is for family formation. One new study produced by one of my favorite groups, the Institute for Family Studies, found that 75% of the fertility rate decline since 2007 is due to changing marriage rates. But the statistics are only confirming what should have already been obvious. If you can't even take on a lifelong commitment towards someone you already know and already like, how in the world can we expect you to take on a lifelong commitment towards a child that you've never met? Children have basically had it right this whole time. There's a clear sequence to this. First comes love, then comes marriage, then comes the baby and the baby carriage. We need to do more in terms of policy to actually promote marriage and family formation. We need to remove some of the impediments. We need to make it easier for young men to get jobs and harder for them to get addicted to pornography or anything else. And we also need to do more to promote an actually positive vision of fatherhood. This is already somewhat underway in big ways and small. J.D. Vance and the entire Trump administration seem to be bringing their children everywhere with them, including the Oval Office. Hollywood stars like Kieran Culkin and Chris Pratt are openly bragging about having their third and fourth kids and also the positive effects that fatherhood has had on their lives. And movies like A Quiet Place are depicting fathers as strong and self-sacrificial for the benefit of their families. I'm skeptical in general about the usefulness of public information campaigns, but we already sort of do this. The federal government spends so much money every single year desperately trying to inform people about how not to have children. They operate under this existential dread that somebody somewhere out there just doesn't know how to find a condom. We should at least consider acting with the same urgency about the problem that actually confronts us now. It seems like it's fallen a little bit out of vogue in Washington, D.C., but I still do think that there's a role to play for actual economic policy as well, both specifically and in general. In general, we think about economics in a bizarre way. Sometimes our policymakers act like they're taking direction from ChatGPT. They think that their job is to maximize a couple of numbers and call it a day. Part of the reason that politicians are so hostile to single-earner households and so eager to subsidize daycare is that they think that this is the best way to make their favorite charts go up the fastest. If only one parent works, for example, only one parent contributes to the GDP. If both parents work, both parents are contributing. And then, if they have to pay someone to watch their kids and take care of them, they're contributing even more. You saw this during COVID, when there was a society-wide freakout over the thought that some women were leaving the workforce in order to take care of their children. Nobody gave a second thought to whether or not these families actually preferred that setup in the first place. The only concern was that the labor force participation rate, had gone down. We have got to stop thinking this way. But there are also specific changes we can make. More people don't want kids, but most still do. A recent survey from Pew Research shows that 70% of never married men want to eventually get married someday, and just under 60% of them want to have children eventually. They want to get married and they want to have kids. They're just not having as many kids as they would like. And one of the things that they say stands most in their way is their financial situation. So why not believe them? An interesting survey from American Compass found that 55% of young people say that they had fewer children than they want, and that affordability was the top reason they listed for not having more. About to wrap this up, but before I get to the closing, I want to point out that I do support, selfishly or unselfishly, extreme levels of economic support for families. We should at least strive for parity with the amount of incentives we give to major corporations and our efforts to achieve high levels of capital formation. Family formation is more important than capital formation. In fact, thank you. This is how we prove the communists wrong. In fact, you can make a serious argument that capital formation is hindered when family formation suffers. However, it's incredibly difficult to discuss which positive solutions could help solve the global demographic crisis when there are so many obvious threats that are causing harm. One would never add an addition onto a house while it is on fire, and simply pursuing economic solutions to this problem without addressing the roots of the harmful effects caused by these predatory industries and the toxic anti-father, anti-male culture that we find ourselves in today would be similarly short-sighted. If we truly want to solve this problem, we need to put out the fire and begin to build from there. Thank you, and God bless you all.